Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. It was 11:47 p.m. when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Not one of those dramatic, life-altering mistakes. At least not yet. I'm talking about the kind of decision that seems harmless in the moment, but sets everything else in motion. I was a traveling salesman back then, always on the road, always chasing the next sales conference, the next commission, the next promise of a bigger paycheck. That particular night, I was driving Route 49 between Winnemucca and Lovelock in Nevada, heading to a sales conference in Reno that started the next morning. I'd spent the entire day in meetings, and instead of stopping at one of the scattered motels along the highway, I decided to push through. I was exhausted but not tired enough to stop. That specific kind of tired where your body's numb and your mind feels disconnected from reality. The landscape out there is something you have to experience to understand. It's not mountains or forests or anything dramatic. It's just emptiness. Mile after mile of nothing but desert and darkness. My headlights cut through the black like a knife, and beyond that cone of light, there was absolutely nothing. No towns, no lights, no signs of life. Just the occasional green highway marker illuminated briefly before disappearing back into the void. My radio was barely working, mostly static, interrupted by the faint signal of some AM station broadcasting from God knows where. The hum of my tires on asphalt was the only consistent thing. I remember thinking about how isolated I felt, how if something happened out here, nobody would know for hours. But that thought didn't really register as a warning. It just felt like an observation. Around mile marker 127, I saw something that didn't belong. At first, it was just a shape on the side of the road, barely visible in the darkness. As I got closer, I realized it was a person. They were hunched over, wearing what looked like an old, tattered jacket. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, young or old. The figure was just there, waiting. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to stop. I've read enough true crime stories, watched enough documentaries about hitchhikers and highway robbers. But it was late, it was cold, and nobody had any business being out here alone on foot at midnight. So I did what I thought was the right thing. I pulled over. The hitchhiker approached the passenger window, and I rolled it down. The smell hit me first, cigarette smoke mixed with something else, something I couldn't quite place, something organic and slightly sweet, almost like decay. The figure's face was still obscured by shadow and the hood of their jacket. I asked where they were headed. Their voice, when they spoke, was quiet and hoarse, like they hadn't used it in a long time. "I need to get to the next town," they said. "Don't matter which one." I told them to get in. I shouldn't have, but I did. They didn't offer their name. They didn't acknowledge anything I said. Tried making small talk, asked if they'd been out here long, made some comment about the weather, but they just stared straight ahead at the road with this intensity I couldn't quite interpret. Their hands kept moving slightly, almost imperceptibly, like they were nervous about something. The cigarette smell coming from them was so strong it made my eyes water, but worse was that other smell. I tried to ignore it. The miles passed in complete silence. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel their presence, their attention. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes, I noticed something odd. The hitchhiker kept looking back at the road behind us in the side mirror. Not just glancing, actually staring, intensely focused on whatever was behind us. I asked what they were looking for. They didn't answer, just kept watching the mirror like something terrible was coming. My unease started to build. Something about this wasn't right. I tried again, asking if they were okay, if something was wrong. This time, they turned to me slowly and asked a question that made my blood run cold. Do you ever get the feeling you're being followed?" I laughed nervously, told them no. I shouldn't have laughed. It felt dismissive of something they clearly believed to be real. They just nodded and said, "You should," then turned back to stare out the windshield. I glanced in my rearview mirror. There were headlights back there, but that wasn't unusual on a highway, even at this hour. Except when I really looked, I realized those headlights had been there for a long time. I couldn't remember a point in the last 10 miles where I hadn't seen them. They were far back, maintaining a consistent distance, just visible enough to know they were there. A chill ran down my spine. I accelerated slightly, just to test something. The headlights accelerated too, maintaining the exact same distance. My heart started racing. I asked the hitchhiker if they knew what was going on. They didn't answer. Their hands were shaking now, visibly shaking, both of them clenched in their lap. When I pressed them, demanded to know what was happening, they suddenly pointed forward and said one thing: "Take the next exit." Now, I didn't question it. I took the exit. The headlights followed. The exit led to an unmarked road, barely more than a dirt track with enough asphalt to make it technically drivable. I drove faster, not quite panicking, but getting close. The vehicle behind us maintained its distance perfectly, like it was on a string. The hitchhiker was rigid now, both hands gripping the dashboard so hard their knuckles were white. I was driving maybe 60, 70 miles an hour down this dark, unmarked road, demanding to know what was happening, but they wouldn't say anything. They just kept staring forward with this expression of pure terror. Then the headlights behind us flashed. Once, twice, high beams cutting through the darkness with brutal intensity. That's when I panicked. I jerked the wheel hard to the right, did a sharp U-turn back toward the highway, tires squealing against the asphalt. For just a second, one brief second, I saw the pursuing vehicle clearly enough to register what it was: a dark sedan, older model, and the driver's seat appeared to be empty. Or the person in it was so obscured by shadow that I couldn't see them. I still don't know which would have been worse. The hitchhiker suddenly screamed. Actually screamed. "Stop the car! Stop it now! Let me out!" I pulled over hard on the shoulder. They had the door open before I'd even fully stopped. They didn't say goodbye or thank you or anything. They just walked into the darkness. Not back toward the road we came from, but straight out into the desert, away from the highway, away from the pursuing car's headlights. I watched them in my rearview mirror, and what I saw didn't make sense. They seemed to fade into the darkness impossibly fast, like they were dissolving rather than walking away. 1 second I could see their outline. The next, they were gone. The headlights of the pursuing vehicle were drawing closer. I floored it. 95 miles an hour back toward the main highway. I didn't care if I wrecked, didn't care if I got pulled over. I just needed to get somewhere with other people, somewhere lit and populated. About 15 miles later, the headlights disappeared. Just vanished. I checked my mirror repeatedly, but the road behind me was empty. No vehicle. No lights. Nothing. I drove another 30 miles before I could convince myself to stop. I pulled into a truck stop, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the door open. I sat in that parking lot for 3 hours. 3 hours. When I finally went inside, I asked the clerk if anyone had reported anything unusual on Route 49. The clerk looked at me like they already knew what I was going to ask. "That road gets reported maybe once a week," they said. "Different people, same story. Someone picked up a hitchhiker and got followed, or they were followed by a car that wasn't there, or they picked up someone who just disappeared. I never saw that hitchhiker again. I never saw the pursuing vehicle clearly enough to identify it. I still don't know if what I experienced was real, or if it was some kind of shared hallucination, some mass delusion that attaches itself to certain stretches of road. But I know I heard the hitchhiker's scream. I know I saw that empty sedan approaching. And I know something isn't right on that stretch of Route 49 between mile marker 127 and Lovelock. I've taken different routes since. So do a lot of other people. I'm a woman. I've been traveling solo since I was 23, and I've learned to trust my instincts. That's the most important thing you can do when you're alone on the road. Trust your instincts. But sometimes your instincts conflict with being polite, with not wanting to seem rude, with not wanting to appear paranoid. Sometimes that conflict gets you into situations you can't get out of. This story is about one of those times. I was relocating from Denver to Nashville for a new job. I'd accepted a position, given notice at my old company, and needed to be in Tennessee by Monday to start. I'd packed my car, said my goodbyes, and left Denver on a Friday at 5 p.m. with the idea that if I drove through the night, I could make it to Nashville with a day to spare. I was exhausted but determined. I'd driven long distances before. I thought I could handle it. Around 11 p.m., after about 6 hours of driving, I started to feel the fatigue hitting hard. My eyes were getting heavy. My concentration was wavering. I pulled into a truck stop called Jackrabbit Junction just outside Salina, Kansas. It was one of those corporate chain places, identical to 1,000 other truck stops across the country. Fluorescent lights cutting through the absolute black of the Kansas night. A handful of big rigs parked in the lot. Inside, maybe 5 other customers at that late hour, all of them looking like they were in the same state of exhaustion I was. I got a coffee, used the restroom, and decided I'd sit in a booth for 30 minutes, let the caffeine hit my system, and then get back on the road. I chose a booth by the window overlooking the parking lot, settled in with my coffee, and tried to mentally prepare myself for another 6 hours of driving. That's when an older man approached my booth. He was in his 60s, weathered face, the kind of worn appearance that comes from decades of living hard. He asked if the seat across from me was taken. I said he could sit. He did. He told me his name was Dale, and he'd been driving trucks for 38 years. We made small talk. He complimented my car, asked where I was headed. I told him about the job in Nashville, that I was driving solo, that I was excited but tired. Everything was normal and friendly until Dale's demeanor shifted. His expression became serious, focused. He leaned forward slightly and said something that made the hair on my arm stand up. "I'm going to give you some advice, and I'm not trying to scare you, but you need to hear it." I asked him what he meant. Dale took a deep breath, and then he told me something that changed how I understood highway travel forever. "That route you're taking," he said, "through Oklahoma, into Arkansas, the I-40 corridor. Don't drive it at night. Not alone. Not for the next 200 miles after you hit the state line. I'm not joking. Don't do it." I asked why. Dale hesitated. I could see him weighing whether to tell me, whether I'd think he was crazy, but he decided to continue. "There's a guy," he said, "has been for at least 5 years. Nobody knows his real name, nobody gets a good look at him. But truck drivers, we talk. We have networks. CB radio, Facebook groups, forums. We share information, and the information we're sharing is about a pattern." Dale explained that women had been reporting for years being followed on certain stretches of I-40 in Oklahoma. The vehicle was consistent in the reports, usually an older model sedan, a Chevy Impala or something similar, always driven at night. The driver would follow for miles, sometimes flashing headlights, sometimes trying to run the victim off the road. Some women reported the driver pulling up alongside them at red lights in small towns and just staring. But here's where it got darker. A few women had reported to police that the same vehicle had been parked outside their hotel later that night. Outside their hotel, after they'd stopped driving. "And here's the thing," Dale said, his voice dropping lower. "3 women have reported this, filed police reports, and the vehicle was never caught, Never identified on traffic cameras, never traced. 2 of those women canceled their trips, got scared, flew home instead. I asked what happened to the 3rd one. Dale's jaw clenched. That's where it gets bad. The 3rd woman made the same report. Said she'd been followed by the vehicle on I-40 near the Oklahoma-Arkansas border. Said she was terrified, but made it to a motel and checked in. Next morning, she didn't check out. Hotel staff found her room empty. Her car was found 2 days later on a service road about 40 miles off the interstate. Abandoned. No trace of her. Still unsolved. 8 months ago. I felt cold. I asked Dale if he'd seen this vehicle himself. He nodded slowly. "Twice," he said. "Both times on I-40 near the state line. Both times it was following another driver. I flashed my high beams to warn them. The car sped off. I tried to follow, see where it went, but it took an exit, and when I caught up, nothing. Just gone, like it had never been there." I asked if he'd reported it. Dale laughed bitterly. "Reported to who? State police? They said there wasn't enough evidence, no actual crime committed according to them. Just reports of an unusual vehicle. That's their official stance." Dale leaned forward more intensely. "Look, I'm telling you this because you seem like a good person, and because if something happened to you, I'd never forgive myself for not warning you hard enough. Take a different route, or wait until morning and drive during daylight, or find someone to travel with. But don't drive I-40 through that corridor alone after dark. I'm begging you." I thanked him, but I also told him I was on a tight schedule. I needed to be in Nashville by Monday. He gave me his CB frequency and wrote down a phone number on a napkin. "If anything feels off," he said, "anything at all. Weird car, wrong feeling, anything. You call this number. It's the dispatch office for Southwest Trucking. Ask for Hank. Tell him Dale sent you. Hank can connect you with other drivers in the area who can help. Who will help." As I was leaving the booth, Dale grabbed my arm gently. He said something I'll never forget. "Whatever you do, if you see that car, don't stop. Don't pull over. Don't unlock your doors. Not for anything. You drive to the nearest well-lit place, preferably a police station or a busy gas station. You drive there and you don't explain anything until you're safe. You understand?" I nodded. I understood. But I drove I-40 anyway. I know that was stupid. I know it was reckless. But I was 29 years old. Confident. Not someone who got scared easily. I convinced myself Dale was exaggerating, that I was being paranoid, that nothing would happen. I merged onto I-40 and headed toward Oklahoma with Dale's warning rattling in the back of my head like an unwanted passenger. For the first 50 miles through Oklahoma, nothing happened. The road was empty, the night was clear, and I started to relax. I told myself Dale was just an old man who'd heard rumors and believed them. I turned up the radio and focused on the drive. Around mile marker 89, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. They were consistent with my speed. I changed lanes, testing. The headlights changed lanes. My relaxation immediately evaporated. My hands tightened on the wheel. I didn't pull over. I accelerated. The vehicle accelerated, drawing closer. I could make out the shape now, a dark sedan, older model. Exactly like Dale had described. My fear spiked into pure panic. I pushed the accelerator harder, doing 80-85 miles an hour through the darkness. The vehicle was gaining on me now, and as it drew alongside on my left, I caught a glimpse of the driver. I tried not to look directly, but I couldn't help it. The driver's seat appeared to be completely dark, like no one was in it, or like the person in it was so obscured by shadow that they were invisible. The sedan stayed there for 30 seconds, just alongside me, just matching my speed. An eternity compressed into 30 seconds. Then it suddenly accelerated, cut in front of me, and disappeared into the darkness ahead. I didn't see it again for the rest of the drive. I never contacted Dale again. I never called that number. I drove the rest of the way to Nashville in a state of suspended horror, checking my mirrors constantly, jumping at every set of headlights behind me. I never found out if the vehicle was real or if I was experiencing highway hypnosis and fear manifesting as a physical threat. But I know what I saw, and I know something about that particular stretch of I-40 feels fundamentally wrong. I never drove it again. When I visit Denver, I take a different route, even though it adds 6 hours to my drive. The $40 in gas isn't worth the possibility of seeing those headlights again. If you're still listening to these stories, you probably enjoy content like this. A like or comment really does help keep these alive on the algorithm, so if this is getting under your skin even a little bit, show it some support. It means a lot, and it helps us keep bringing you these stories. Now, let me tell you about the second one. I've always been someone who likes to work remotely when I can. There's something about changing your environment that makes you more creative, more focused. I found myself renting short-term apartments and cabins through Airbnb, traveling between cities, seeing different places. Asheville, North Carolina felt like a good fit for a few weeks. Mountains, quiet atmosphere, great for concentration. I found this listing, a secluded cottage about 6 miles outside of town, nestled in the forest, $45 a night. The price seemed too good to be true, which should have been my first warning. The listing explained that it was new to the platform and the owner was testing prices for solo travelers and writers. I booked it for 2 weeks, starting on a Sunday in October. The drive up to the cottage was the beginning of my mistake. The property was accessed by a long gravel driveway that seemed to go on forever, surrounded on both sides by dense forest. The cottage itself was small, maybe 900 square feet, but it looked clean from the outside. Inside was sparse, minimal furniture, 1 bedroom, a kitchen that barely qualified as one. There was no Wi-Fi, which I'd expected, and only a landline phone for emergencies. But here's what struck me most: the silence. When you're 6 miles from the nearest neighbor, when your cell phone has no signal, when there are no sounds of traffic or people or civilization, the silence becomes oppressive. It presses down on you. That's what I felt the moment I closed the door. I set up in the main room, unpacked my laptop, and tried to settle into my routine. I worked for a few hours, made dinner, and by 10 p.m. I was in bed. The cottage had good locks, and I made sure they were secured. I wasn't nervous at that point, just tired from the drive. Around 2 a.m. I heard footsteps on the front porch. They were deliberate, slow, like someone was pacing. My first thought was that it was an animal, a deer or an elk, but the sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful. The footsteps went back and forth across the porch 3 times, then stopped. Complete silence after that. I lay in bed, telling myself I was imagining things, that isolation makes you paranoid. I eventually fell back asleep. Around 3:15 a.m. I heard the door handle rattle. Someone was trying to get in, not pulling hard, just testing the lock, seeing if it would give. Rattle once. Rattle twice. Then nothing. I was awake instantly, adrenaline flooding my system. I grabbed my phone to call the police, remembered there was no cell signal, and ran to the landline. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. I gave them the address, told them. Someone was trying to get into the cottage. They said they'd send a deputy to check it out. The drive took 40 minutes. The deputy who arrived was polite but clearly skeptical. He checked around the property, found nothing. No signs of forced entry or footprints in the dirt. No evidence that anyone had been there at all. Before he left, he asked me something odd. "This is the old Patterson place, right? How much you paying for this?" I told him. He made this weird, uncomfortable laugh, like he knew something he wasn't saying. "Well, call us if anything else happens," he said, and drove off. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I did something I should have done before I even booked the place. I looked at the Airbnb listing more carefully. I tried to contact the host. No profile picture, no response to messages, no reviews on the listing, no history of previous bookings that I could find. It was like the listing was a ghost. While I was investigating, I also did something else. I started really looking at the cottage. There was a coffee mug in the kitchen sink with a lipstick stain on the rim. The mug was clean, recently washed, but not put away. In the bedroom, there was a paperback book left face down on the nightstand, a thriller with a bent spine like it had been read multiple times. In the bathroom, I found a woman's hairbrush in a drawer. None of these things had been there when I arrived, or I hadn't noticed them. Either way, they suggested recent occupancy. I assumed the owner had been here recently and hadn't cleaned thoroughly. But then I found the second bedroom. I hadn't opened that door my first day. I assumed it was just extra space. When I opened it on Monday morning, I found a bed, an unmade bed, like someone had slept in it recently. There was a pillow with an indentation in it. A blanket pulled halfway across the mattress. On the nightstand, there were fresh grocery items, a bottle of water, a granola bar still in its wrapper. Everything pointed to someone having been in this room recently. Maybe that morning. Maybe last night. I went back to the main room and started looking at the photographs on the mantel. There were 5 of them in cheap frames, all turned face down. I flipped them over one by one. All of them showed young women, different faces, but all photographed in the same way, from about the same distance, same angle, same lighting. One photo had a date written on the back in faded ink, June 2023. That was the only date. The others had no identifying information. I started to feel genuinely afraid. Not paranoid, not uncomfortable, afraid. There was something fundamentally wrong about this place, and I was alone out here with no neighbors, no cell signal, and no one who knew exactly where I was. That night I heard movement inside the cottage. Not footsteps on the porch. Movement inside. Sounds coming from the main room like something was being moved around. Chair scraping across the floor. Doors opening and closing slowly. I locked my bedroom door, turned on every light in the room, and sat on the bed all night with a kitchen knife in my lap. By morning, I was exhausted and terrified. And when I opened the bedroom door, I could see that things had moved. The chair from the kitchen was now in the living room. The curtains that had been closed were now open. The second bedroom door, which I had deliberately closed and locked, was now wide open. I packed everything I owned into my car, without breakfast, without hesitation. I drove to downtown Asheville and went straight to the library to use their public Wi-Fi. I searched for the property address and the owner's name, and what I found made my hands go numb. The cottage had been the site of a missing person investigation in 2022. 3 women had disappeared in that general area over a 2-year period. One of them was supposedly last seen at a rental property near my location. The owner of the property, a man named Marcus Webb, had been investigated but never charged. He was found dead in 2023, ruled as a suicide. The case had gone cold. I called the non-emergency police line. An officer took my information, and their tone suggested this was old news. "You're not the first person to call in about that place," they said. "Probably the 6th in the last year. Similar stories every time. The property listing should have been taken down, but it's been a bureaucratic nightmare. The owner's estate isn't fully settled, and Airbnb claims it fell through the cracks on their end. They advised me to leave immediately and file a formal complaint with both the county and Airbnb. They told me they couldn't open a new investigation based on sounds and moved furniture, but they took my report anyway. I called for a tow truck and paid extra to have my car retrieved from the property the next day. I never went back to get it myself. I couldn't. A week later, I checked Airbnb again. The listing was still active, still available for booking. There was a new review posted. Just one from someone named Anonymous Guest. Here's it said. The host no longer responds, but the cottage is very atmospheric. Stayed one night, didn't sleep much. I still don't know what made those sounds. I don't know who moved those items or why someone's bed was slept in. I don't know what happened to those 3 women. I only know that I was sleeping 30 feet away from something, some answer or evidence that nobody was actively looking for. And that terrifies me more than anything I can explain. I'm not an outdoors person by trade, but I love solitude. I love being alone in nature, away from people, away from noise, away from the demands of civilization. That's why I booked a ranger cabin in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State for a solo camping weekend in July. The cabin was managed through Washington State Parks and rented through their official system. It required an 11-mile hike from the nearest parking lot, which meant real isolation. No other tourists casually wandering by. No sounds of traffic in the distance. Just me and the mountains. I hiked in on a Friday afternoon, and when I reached the cabin, I felt like I'd stepped back in time. It was an old wooden structure, probably built in the 1970s, with weathered exterior walls and a covered porch. Inside was basic: a wood stove for heating, a hand pump well for water, a cot with a thin mattress, some old furniture. No electricity, no running water, just the essentials. That's exactly what I wanted. I settled in, built a fire in the stove, cooked a simple dinner, and spent the evening reading by firelight. As the sun set and darkness fell completely, I became aware of a silence so profound it felt almost physical. There were no distant traffic sounds, no distant civilization, no human noise at all, just the wind in the trees and my own breathing. I found it deeply peaceful. Around 1:30 a.m. I woke up to a sound. Something heavy was dragging across the roof, dragging slowly, methodically, like something with significant weight was moving across the wooden shingles. The sound was deliberate, not wind moving a branch, not an animal causing accidental noise. This was something with purpose, something moving with intention. I got out of the cot, lit my lantern, and looked out the window. I couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond the small circle of light from my lantern. The sound stopped after a few minutes, and I eventually convinced myself it was probably a bear or an elk, something large that had walked across the roof for reasons of its own. I went back to sleep, though not easily. In the morning, I explored the cabin grounds. On the roof, I found something that shouldn't have been there. Fresh scratch marks, deep gouges in the wood, like something had been clawing or dragging itself across the shingles. The marks were recent, still showing fresh wood beneath the weathered surface. Near the back of the cabin, I discovered a small wooden structure barely visible under overgrowth and moss. It was an outhouse, old and deteriorating, but carved into the interior wooden walls were names and dates. Initials really, followed by months and years. M.H., June 1987. R.K., August 1992. J.L., October 2004. Ta, March 2009. Each entry was carved deliberately into the wood, deep enough that it had lasted decades. I photographed the carvings but didn't think too deeply about what they might mean. Not yet. Saturday, I spent hiking around the area, collecting wood, trying to stay active and push away the growing unease from the night before. By 5 p.m., I returned to the cabin as the weather was changing. The sky was darkening in an unnatural way, the wind picking up. Inside the cabin, I found something I hadn't noticed when I arrived, a leather-bound journal on a shelf. It was dated 1982 on the cover. The first entries were written by someone named Robert Chen, identified as the assigned park ranger for this station. The early entries were routine, weather observations, maintenance notes, animal sightings. But as I read deeper, The tone shifted. Entries from 1982 and 1983 became increasingly erratic and paranoid. The scratching sounds again tonight. Nothing visible. But something is here, in the trees, watching the cabin. A later entry. I'm not imagining this. There are sounds at night, regular patterns, deliberate. Whatever this is, it knows I'm here. The final entry, dated October 8th, 1983. I'm leaving tomorrow. I can't stay another night. The sounds are more frequent, closer. I've seen something in the tree line. Tall, impossibly thin. I don't know what it is, but I know it's been tracking my movements. I'm abandoning this post. Let someone else deal with this. My hands were shaking as I read these words. I tried to tell myself this was fiction or the ramblings of someone mentally unwell. But the handwriting looked genuine, desperate, authentic. This wasn't someone creating a story. This was someone recording their descent into fear. That night, the sounds returned, but this time they weren't just on the roof. They were in the walls. Sounds of something moving inside the cabin's wooden framework, crawling through the spaces between the boards. The sounds moved deliberately, tracking a path around the interior perimeter of the cabin. I kept my lantern lit all night. I barred the door. I didn't sleep. Sunday morning, I decided to pack and leave immediately. But first, I did something I shouldn't have. I looked more carefully around the cabin. Behind the main support beam, I found another journal. Newer, dated 2015-2017. This one was written by Marcus Webb, identified as the park ranger. The same patterns emerged: unexplained sounds, a presence in the forest, something tall and thin observed at a distance. But Webb's entries were even more disturbing. He'd done research. He'd found records of previous rangers, and he'd documented a pattern. I've identified the names of previous rangers or visitors assigned to or who visited this cabin. Each name matches the dates carved into the outhouse. All of them reported the same sounds. All of them left. One never came back. Webb listed several names, several that matched what I'd seen carved into the outhouse. Webb's last official entry, dated March 17th, 2017. I'm submitting my resignation effective immediately. I've documented the pattern and I'm reporting it to the regional office. Nobody should be assigned to this location. Whatever has established itself in these woods, it knows when humans arrive. The sounds escalate in frequency and proximity. It's testing the boundaries of the cabin. One day soon, something won't stop at just sounds. But there was another page, loose, tucked into the back, written in a shaky hand, dated weeks later. I can't sleep knowing others will be sent here. The regional office dismissed my report. They called it occupational stress. But I know what I experienced. If you're reading this, you need to leave. Now. Immediately. Tell people. The location needs an official investigation because whatever it is, it's still there, and it's patient. It knows humans leave eventually, but it always comes back. I didn't waste time reading anything else. I packed my belongings and started hiking out immediately. As I was leaving, I heard the scratching sound one final time, but it was farther away, in the deeper forest, tracking my movement, keeping pace with my departure. I hiked out without stopping. I didn't look back. Once I was back at civilization, I researched both rangers. Robert Chen seemed to have no public records of his employment or departure. It was like he'd been erased from the system. Marcus Webb's records showed he quit in March 2017 with no reason given. His current location is unknown. I filed a report with the Washington Parks office, provided them with both journals, and indicated that the cabin should be investigated. They took the journals but indicated no formal investigation has been opened. The cabin is probably still available for booking. I checked a few weeks ago. Someone could be renting it right now on this very night, sleeping 30 feet away from something that makes deliberate sounds in the darkness, something that's been there for decades, patiently waiting for the next person to arrive. I don't know if something is genuinely present in that location, or if that place does something to people's minds, breaks them down, makes them see and hear things that aren't real. But I know 2 separate rangers experienced something there. And I know I heard those sounds myself, and I know I'll never go back to find out which explanation is true. Some say the scariest things aren't monsters or criminals or anything with a clear explanation. Some say the scariest things are the gaps, the spaces between what you witnessed and what you can explain, the knowledge that something happened, but you can't quite put it into a logical framework that makes sense. I've told you 4 stories, 4 roads I'll never travel again, 4 experiences that fundamentally changed how I understand fear and isolation and the nature of reality itself. But here's what I want you to understand. I'm not unique. I'm not special. I'm just someone who had these experiences and decided to speak about them. But there are thousands of people out there who have similar stories. Stories they haven't told. Stories they're afraid to tell. Because they know how they sound. There are highways across this country with reputations. Small towns with unspoken warnings. Cabins and motels and stretches of road that people quietly avoid. Drivers who take different routes, travelers who don't come back, locals who know better than to go out after dark in certain areas, even if they can't articulate why. The next time you're planning a road trip, especially if you're traveling alone, do yourself a favor. Ask around. Talk to locals. Listen to warnings, even if they sound insane. Listen to truck drivers and gas station attendants and people who've lived in these areas their whole lives. Because sometimes the people warning you aren't crazy or superstitious. Sometimes they're just survivors. Sometimes they've learned these lessons the hard way. I survived my encounters. I'm here to tell these stories. But I know others weren't as fortunate. And that thought, the thought that there are stories out there that will never be told, experiences that ended in silence, that's what keeps me up at night. Drive safe out there. And if you see something that doesn't belong, trust your instincts. Trust them completely. Because the worst decision you can make is deciding that something isn't real after you've already seen it. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe if you made it through these stories. Leave a comment with where you're from and what you thought about these encounters. And be careful out there on those highways, because you never know who or what you might pick up along the way.